Deep within the misty woods of the Thuringian forest in central Germany, a place famous for fairy tales and dense, dark pines, lies a relic of a far more modern tragedy. It's a single weathered tramcar. It sits on a fragment of track, overgrown with weeds, that abruptly ends in the middle of nowhere. To stumble upon it is to feel like you've walked into a glitch in reality. This is not a place for public transport. This is the heart of the wilderness. The tram itself is a ghost of German engineering from the 1930s. Its curved, almost elegant design is still visible beneath layers of rust and peeling paint. The glass in its windows is long gone, leaving dark, hollow openings that seem to absorb the forest's silence. It's a sad, lonely sight, but its story is not one of simple decay. This tram is believed to be the very first victim of the Iron Curtain. According to the fragments of local history that have survived, this car ran its last route in 1946. It was part of a small, interurban line connecting local villages, a lifeline for a community trying to rebuild itself after the war. But its tracks had the misfortune of crossing the newly drawn demarcation line between the Soviet and American occupation zones. One day, the tram completed its run, pulling into its final stop just yards from the invisible border. It stopped there and never moved again. This raises a chilling set of questions that form the basis of our investigation. Why was it abandoned? In the chaos of 1946, borders were hardening daily, but traffic hadn't stopped completely. Was this an act of quiet defiance? A bureaucratic oversight in a world drowning in paperwork? Or was it something more personal and tragic? Did the driver simply park his tram at the end of his shift, go home to the other side of the line, and wake up the next morning to find he could never return to his job? This single, forgotten tramcar is not just scrap metal. It's the tombstone of a community, marking the exact spot where a nation was torn in two. To understand why a tram would be left to rust in a forest, we must step back into the world it last served. The year is 1946. World War II has been over for less than a year, but Europe is far from peaceful. It is a continent of ghosts, rubble, and profound uncertainty. Germany, in particular, lies at the heart of this post-war paralysis. The nation is not only physically shattered but also politically vivisected, carved into 4 occupation zones controlled by the victorious Allies: the Americans, the British, the French, and the Soviets. Our story unfolds in Thuringia, a region of rolling hills and ancient forests that found itself sliced in two by this new world order. The invisible line separating the American and Soviet zones cut through communities that had been unified for centuries. This wasn't yet the Berlin Wall, with its concrete barriers and watchtowers. In 1946, it was a more ambiguous, porous border, but one that was hardening by the day. Soldiers patrolled the woods, checkpoints sprang up on country roads, and a simple trip to a neighboring village now required permits, interrogations, and a healthy dose of luck. An atmosphere of suspicion hung in the air, thick as the morning fog. In this fractured landscape, our small, interurban tram line was more than just public transport. It was a stubborn artery of normal life. Its daily clatter was a sound of defiance against the silence of destruction. Its passengers were a cross-section of a society struggling to survive. There were women balancing baskets of precious vegetables, hoping to trade them for other goods in the next town. There were men in worn-out coats, traveling to clear rubble or work in a factory that had miraculously survived the bombing. And there were countless others, simply trying to reconnect with family, scanning the faces at every stop in the desperate hope of finding a lost loved one. The journey was short, perhaps only a dozen miles, but crossing from one zone to another felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. On one side, the presence of American GIs brought a sense of cautious optimism and the occasional luxury of chocolate or cigarettes. On the other, the rigid discipline of the Soviet military created a more tense, watchful environment. The tram was one of the last threads connecting these diverging realities. Every day it ran was a small victory for normalcy. But in 1946, normalcy was a fragile commodity, and this lifeline was about to be severed by forces far beyond its control. The abrupt end of the line for our forest tram was not a single dramatic event. There was no explosion, no official decree that has survived the test of time. Instead, its fate seems to be woven from the chaotic threads of the post-war era. Historians and local researchers point to three compelling theories, each painting a different picture of the tram's final days. The first, and perhaps most mundane, theory is one of bureaucratic paralysis. In 1946, Germany was a nightmare of paperwork. Two vast, opposing administrative systems, the American and the Soviet, were being imposed upon a single, shattered society. Regulations changed weekly. A permit valid on Monday could be worthless by Wednesday. It's entirely plausible that the tram was halted by a new, obscure directive. Perhaps a Soviet commander demanded a new type of travel document for the driver, or an American officer decided the line needed a different license to operate. The tram could have been parked temporarily, awaiting a stamp of approval or a signature from an official who may have been transferred or simply overwhelmed. In the administrative chaos, temporary slowly bled into permanent, and the forgotten tram became a monument to bureaucratic inertia. The second theory is more strategic, an act of quiet economic warfare. A tram line is an economic artery. It moves workers to jobs and goods to markets. By cutting that line, one side could effectively strangle the economic life of the villages on the other. With the main factory, market, or power station now in the American zone, the Soviets may have seen little benefit in allowing their citizens to remain economically tethered to the West. Shutting down the line, perhaps by simply cutting the power or revoking access, was a subtle but powerful first move in the great game of the Cold War. It was a way of saying, this territory is ours now. Its future lies with us, not with them. The tram was not just collateral damage. It was the intended victim. Finally, there's the most human and poignant theory, the story of the last driver. History is not just made by armies and politicians, but by the choices of ordinary people. Imagine the driver on that final day. He lives on the Soviet side of a new border. He completes his shift, parks the tram at the designated end-of-line stop, and walks the short distance to his home. That night, the rules change. A new patrol is stationed. A new checkpoint is established. The next morning, he wakes to find he cannot cross back to the depot in the American zone to start his shift. His employers cannot send a replacement. The tram is stranded, a metal hostage separated from its operator, both victims of a line drawn on a map. The truth may very well be a combination of all three. A bureaucratic snag may have provided the initial excuse, which then served a strategic purpose, and was sealed by the personal tragedy of a single worker trapped by history. The tram didn't just stop. It was ensnared in a web of politics, economics, and human fate. When history leaves a vacuum, folklore rushes in to fill it. Over more than 70 years of silent vigil in the Thuringian forest, the abandoned tram has transformed from a simple piece of machinery into a local legend, a canvas for the fears, hopes, and imagination of the surrounding communities. Its story has been told and retold around dinner tables and in village pubs, each telling adding another layer of mystique. The most enduring legend is that of the Ghost Run. As the tale goes, on certain misty nights, particularly on the anniversary of its last journey, the old tram stirs. Locals have claimed to see its interior lights flicker to life, casting a faint, eerie glow into the dark woods. Some even whisper of hearing the faint clang of its bell or the spectral sound of wheels grinding on rusty rails, as if the driver from 1946 is still trying to complete his final, impossible run. This story served as a powerful metaphor during the Cold War, a ghostly reminder of a connection that was severed but not forgotten, a community forever yearning to be whole again. For decades, it was a tale told to frighten children away from the increasingly militarized border zone. Another popular story frames the tram as a hiding place for lost treasure. This version of the myth posits that in the final, chaotic days of the war, a high-ranking Nazi official or a wealthy family, fleeing the advancing armies, hid a cache of gold, jewels, or important documents within the tram structure. They supposedly intended to retrieve it later, but were either captured, killed, or unable to return. The tram's abandonment was thus a deliberate act to protect its secret contents. This legend has lured treasure hunters and adventurers to the site over the years, armed with metal detectors and shovels, each hoping to uncover a fortune. They found nothing but rusted bolts and decaying floorboards, but the dream of lost riches keeps the story alive. A third, more somber myth speaks of it as a place of a final, tragic farewell. In this telling, the tram was the scene of a clandestine meeting between lovers separated by the new border. They met one last time inside the empty car, knowing they would never see each other again. In some variations, the story ends in heartbreak. In others, it ends in tragedy, with one or both taking their own lives rather than face a future apart. The tram, in this context, becomes a monument to love and loss, a silent tombstone for all the personal relationships shattered by the Iron Curtain. These stories, while factually untrue, reveal a deeper truth. They show how people grappled with the raw, senseless reality of a divided nation. The ghost runs, the hidden treasure, the tragic lovers. These were all ways of giving meaning to an object that stood as a stark symbol of powerlessness. The tram wasn't just abandoned machinery. It was a keeper of secrets, a vessel for collective memory, and a silent character in the ongoing drama of a fractured land. While legends offer a romantic and often thrilling narrative, the truth behind the forest tram is, as it so often is, buried in dusty archives and the dry language of official records. Recent investigations by dedicated local historians, piecing together fragments from both German and Russian sources, have finally painted a clear and compelling picture of the events of 1946. The answer, it turns out, is a pragmatic and uniquely post-war blend of logistics, economics, and politics. The key to the mystery lies not in a single dramatic event, but in a series of calculated decisions. The tram line, designated simply as Line 83, was operated by a municipal transport authority whose headquarters, main depot, and power station were all located in a town that fell under American control. However, a significant portion of the track, including the final terminus stop, stretched into the newly established Soviet zone. For the first year after the war, an uneasy cooperation continued. The Soviets allowed the tram to operate because it was the only way for workers from their zone to reach a crucial textile factory in the American sector. The factory needed the workers, and the workers needed the wages. The tram was the linchpin holding this fragile economic arrangement together. The breaking point came in the summer of 1946. Archival records from the Soviet Military Administration in Germany, SMAD, reveal a directive focused on economic consolidation. The Soviets were beginning the systematic process of dismantling and transferring German industrial assets to the USSR as war reparations. More importantly, they were determined to reorient their zone's economy eastward, cutting dependencies on the West. A memo from a mid-level Soviet logistics officer provides the crucial evidence. It states that Line 83 is economically inefficient and politically undesirable. The factory in the American zone had started hiring displaced persons from elsewhere, reducing its reliance on workers from the Soviet side. In response, the Soviet directive ordered the cessation of cross-zonal transport on this line. The power supply from the American side was to be cut, and the tracks on the Soviet side were slated for removal, their steel needed for reconstruction projects elsewhere. On a specific day in late August 1946, the order was carried out. The last tram of the day completed its route into the Soviet zone. The driver, likely informed that this was the final run, parked the vehicle at the terminus as instructed. He and any remaining passengers would have disembarked and walked across the now sealed border for the last time. The power was cut from the other side. The tram was now a stranded asset. The Soviet authorities had no use for a single German tramcar. They had their own rolling stock and different track gauges. Dismantling and moving it was deemed more trouble than it was worth. So, it was simply left behind. Not out of spite, not to hide a treasure, but because of a cold, calculated decision recorded on a piece of paper in a dusty file. It was a casualty of logistical planning and the dawning reality of the Iron Curtain. Today, the forest tram of Thuringia sits in the same spot where it was left in 1946. The world around it has changed irrevocably. The Soviet and American soldiers are long gone. The Iron Curtain that once seemed so permanent has vanished, its watchtowers dismantled and its barbed wire fences rolled up. Germany is a unified nation once again, and the invisible line the tram failed to cross is now just a faint memory on the landscape, noticeable only to those who know where to look. Yet, the tram remains. It has outlasted the political system that condemned it to obsolescence. It has become something more than a failed piece of infrastructure. It is no longer a symbol of division, but a monument to resilience and the relentless passage of time. For decades, it was a forbidden object in a restricted military zone, a place of whispered legends. Now, it has become a destination for a different kind of traveler: hikers, photographers, and history enthusiasts who make the pilgrimage into the woods to see it. They come not for treasure, but for a tangible connection to the past. To stand beside it is to feel the weight of history. You can run your hand over the cold, rusted steel and imagine the world it once knew. A world of ration cards, uncertain futures, and the quiet anxieties of the Cold War's dawn. The tram is a powerful lesson in perspective. For the bureaucrats of 1946, it was a trivial asset, a minor detail on a balance sheet, not even worth the cost of removal. For the people who once rode it, it was a vital lifeline, its abandonment a source of hardship and sorrow. Today, its value is neither economic nor practical, but historical and emotional. It reminds us that grand political decisions have real, tangible consequences, and that history is not just an abstract narrative, but something that happens to real people and real things, like a solitary tramcar left to be reclaimed by the forest. It serves as a silent guardian of memory, a physical anchor to a story that could otherwise be lost to the pages of history books. It proves that even the most mundane objects can absorb the drama of their time, becoming accidental memorials. It is not a ruin. It is a survivor, a silent storyteller whose very existence speaks volumes about the world that made it, broke it, and ultimately forgot it.